حبوبي بالوصال نعم علي وجد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. In these next two sessions, we are going to be speaking about what is considered to be, what is chapter 6 from book 1, where this is where Imam al-Ghazali will list what he calls the alamat, which are signs of the ulama al-akhirah, of the scholars of the hereafter. Now he does use the word ulama, which is the plural of alim, and of course the alim is the one who knows. So this is not, of course, limited to the scholars. This is first and foremost directed to them, that if someone is a person of knowledge and they reach a degree where they can be considered to be a scholar, then this certainly would apply to them, meaning that these are objective criterion, that they can take a very close look at themselves, scrutinize themselves, so they can see, are they fully putting their knowledge into practice, and from these great people that you read in the ahadith and hear in the hadith of our Prophet ﷺ about their rank. So he gives a very clear list of criteria. In fact, he will mention 12. And it is a very long section. It actually goes on for, let's count how many pages here, even though this print that I have, the pages are kind of slow. It goes from page 217 to 304. So you can do the math. But that's not too far, not too short of 100 pages. So there's a lot of material here, and of course, we're not going to be able to read 100 pages in that 2 sessions, but we're going to cover all 12, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And so, one thing that we can really think about, and this is worth mentioning, if we speak of the idea of an alim, a scholar, what does that mean in our particular context? There's not a simple criterion in which you can just say, this person's alim, this person's not an alim. And me personally, I actually don't like titles. I know that in our deen we have titles, and I know that there's certain ways that we speak about people. I just had a flashback now, of our conversation in Uzbekistan. I personally consider myself to be your brother, that I think that sometimes some of the titles that are used, the word Shaykh and Ustad and Sidi and these types of things, Imam, oftentimes can get a little bit misleading. And while certainly there is a hierarchy in our deen, and that people that have more knowledge, that have a responsibility on their shoulders that is increased than people who don't. But I think we do need to be a bit careful, because if you really look at the criterion for what it means to be an alim, the criterion it's not an easy thing. And what does it mean to be an alim, a scholar, in our context? So let's just say that someone had a lot of knowledge. They had memorized the Quran, they'd memorized, let's just say, Sahih Bukhari and several thousand other hadith. They'd studied the textual tradition, so they're very familiar with the basic text, which is remarkably consistent throughout the world. Remarkably consistent. Without a magisterium. Without it being forced on each geographical region. It's remarkably consistent. Some places place a little bit of focus on one thing or the other, and they've studied that basic curriculum, which could take anywhere from 5 to 10 to 12 years, depending upon where it is that you are studying. And so that in the basic sciences of the Arabic language, they have studied sarf, and they've studied grammar, and they've studied rhetoric, and some of the other sciences that relate to the Arabic language. They've studied logic, for instance, that they have gone well beyond what they need for themselves in terms of fiqh, that they're very well aware of, not just in relation to the acts of worship, but also the mu'amalat, the dealings. They can give people guidance on their financial transactions and things of this nature, and their business dealings. and they're people that know what to do in terms of getting people married and what constitutes a divorce and whatnot. These are also people that have studied that more than the basics and memorized several texts really in every science. We won't go into the details. So let's just say someone had all of that, but they didn't speak English, such that they didn't have an ability to translate everything that is that they know in our context here. Something would be missing. And nothing is more important than having homegrown scholars. And I have teachers who don't speak English who are definitely ulama. My point in saying this is, I think part of our criterion for these homegrown scholars that need to come from these lands is that they are intimately familiar with the customs and the ways of the people of these lands. In other words, what I'm saying is, it's hard to really to be considered a scholar if you're not able to speak to people in a language that they understand. And naturally, if someone grew up in public schools here, if that's what you call them, that's what we call them back home, and they went to the university, they're going to think a certain way. They've been exposed to certain concepts. They've been affected and infected oftentimes by whatever exists out there in this world. We're also affected regularly by social media and advertisements and billboards and just daily conversations and what we see happening around us, and that football matches and all the pubs that are on the corners and we're affected by all this stuff just by living in these societies. So it would seem to me that if we were going to use this word ālim in terms of like a homegrown type scholar, someone, let's just say now you had a child that you wanted to prepare to really be able to serve our people here. It of course would be a prerequisite that they not only speak English, but they're actually eloquent. They know how to use the English language very well. They know how to use the English language as an Islamic language. They know when to leave something in Arabic and translate the concept or the meaning, and when to that articulate it in the native tongue. And they're intimately familiar with what led to, let's just say, British society becoming British society. To me, this would be very important. And whatever they'd have to do that, from studying philosophy to that reading history to being culturally conversant, this is essential. Otherwise, how are they going to really reach our people? And America is no different. And this to me is very important as we think through these things. And as we want to have a plan that's not just in the short term. We need it to reach a point where people can become extremely learned here. And I'm not saying that we divorce ourselves from overseas. That's ridiculous. All of the asanid come from here, the east, or maybe you consider also a little bit to the south, that you have to connect to the chain of transmission. There's no doubt about that. But also we have a lot of work to do here. And even though there's a lot of good happening here, as well as the United States of America and other places in the West, there's a long way for us to go, where the right people can really be trained to do the work that needs to be done, and that can really lead the way and have the vision in order to do that. And then there's other things that you're going to need to add by virtue of the time in which we live. And Shaykh Hassan's not here, but if you ask anyone who started their own organization, the different skill sets that you need to run an organization. You're not trained in a formal madrasa on leadership. You're not trained in a formal madrasa and any management skills. Now, you could say though that when you really start reading about the theory of management and leadership, you're actually really trained. You're getting the core training that you need, for sure. And you have all these people now who are talking about ego-free leadership, and you're talking about that all of these other components that, even if you look at, the level five leadership, the 5 levels of leadership. The 5th level is essentially the murabbi, who spends 80% of his time developing the level 4 leader. Right? That's the most important thing for the level 5 leaders, to spend 80% of their time developing level 4 leaders. And then when you start getting into these books, that you see a lot of similarities. You're trained in some of the general concepts, but not necessarily in their specific application. There's things that need to be learned. Anyhow, that's a whole, just a little sidetrack there, and hopefully some thought-provoking, because it's something we really need to think about. Because this is vital for the future. And as we have it right now, people tend to just go overseas to study. But we also need to be able to provide that. And not just one line. There have been madaris here for decades. But there needs to be a diversity of different types of schools and different scholarly methodologies to cater to the diversity that's in our society. So anyhow, that's just a thought there. To get right to what he's speaking about here, he says the following as by way of introduction to these scholars of the signs of the scholars of the hereafter. قد ذكرنا ما ورد من فضائل العلم والعلماء. We have previously mentioned what has been narrated about the merit and virtue of both knowledge and scholars. وقد ورد في العلماء السوء تشديدات عظيمة دلت على أنهم أشد الخلق عذابا يوم القيامة. And we have also mentioned that narrations about the quote-unquote evil scholars, that severe warnings that indicated that they're the most severely punished people on the Day of Judgment. It is not to deter us from learning, but it's to deter us from when someone's in a position of power and they have religious knowledge, and Allah has created the fitrah, the natural disposition is to look up to these people and to want to follow them. And then someone abuses that and uses it for their own personal interest, either by abusing someone of the opposite gender, using it to get money from people, or something of this nature. This is one of the worst things you can possibly do. And it's really, really serious. And just to be frank, think about how we're affected by these scandals that keep coming out. Happened to so-and-so, happened to so-and-so. These things just keep coming out. It is devastating for people. Because their connection to the deen is oftentimes through these people. Now, on one hand, you have to build people back up and that remind people that these people are human and that they err, and even though they're scholars, that they make mistakes. So there's a building up process you have to do. You have to build in them maturity so they have realistic expectations in the various degrees of people that they are taking the religion from. Learning from a student of knowledge is not like learning from that advanced student of knowledge, which is not like learning from a young teacher, which is not like learning from a seasoned scholar, which is not like learning from a scholar or a great murabbi, and someone who trains people spiritually. There's degrees. So we have to recognize what to take from whom and what to expect from whom realistically. So that's a part of our job, is to understand that. But the principle still stands. And this actually took me a long time to really understand. In the work that we're doing back home in Pennsylvania, quite a few families have moved into the area to benefit. And I noticed, as is the case, some of the community issues. Whenever you bring people together, there's going to be issues. There's going to be people who don't get along. There's going to be people who put other people off. It's natural. It's almost unavoidable. Then the key is, okay, what do you do? And what do you agree upon as a group living nearby or with each other to solve that? And that, again, takes a lot of work. But what I noticed was people's number one need after that pertains to the relationship to Allah Ta'ala was that people were looking for a sense of belonging. And they would disproportionately be affected by people in the community. Meaning, the people that they saw as closer to the heart of the institution, if something happened with them, it questioned their sense of belonging. So, so-and-so seemed to be close to the teacher, but then so-and-so doesn't really get along with so-and-so. So, so-and-so here who had this issue with this person here who's seen to be close to the teacher starts to question, maybe there's something wrong with my religion. Maybe there's something wrong with me. I'm not fitting in. Maybe I have it. And it's really deep stuff, Yani. It's really deep. And it could be severely problematic if these people don't realize the responsibility that's on their shoulders. And this is why it's so, so important. You see this all of the time. Most of the people that cause most of the problems are the students of the teachers, not the teachers. And it's because of their immaturity. And we just need to get over this. And the teachers need to be responsible and train their students in their community to love all of the people of Allah. We should genuinely, obviously love the Prophet ﷺ, but we also love all the Prophets. We might genuinely love Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq a little bit more than another companion, but we love all of them. But we love the companions, and it's not mutually exclusive. We also love Ahl Bayt, and we love the great inheritors. And if someone's Hanafi, they should love Imam Abu Hanifa, but they should also love Imam Shafi and all of the other great Imams. And that if fast forwarding a little bit, that they love Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, that they should also love the Imam Abu Hassan al-Shadili and Imam Ahmad al-Rifai and all the other great Imams. They should love all of the people from the different spiritual paths. They should love the awliya that are manifestations of more rigorous and majestic names of Allah, just as they should love the awliya that are manifestations of the beautiful names of Allah. And naturally, we're going to love some people more than others, and that's fine, but not to the point where we look down upon or criticize or differentiate between them. It seems so simple, but there's an issue in the way, and it's the nafs. If someone takes a particular shaykh or a particular way, it's almost like they have to convince other people and themselves to a certain degree that this way is the best, right, with a capital B, as opposed to simply making the distinction, this is what's best for me. So if there was 2 retreats going on at the same time, I would tell you, if this is not what's best for you, go to that retreat. Don't come here. You're welcome here. But my point is, like, we should want what's best for someone. So if I have a particular spiritual path and someone comes to me and I know that they actually should be a part of another spiritual path because that's a better fit for them, I am not sincere with Allah. I'm treacherous if I call them to my way. That's wrong. That people have different teachers. They have different ways, and that must be respected. And this is a human problem. This has been a problem throughout centuries. This is a problem all over the world. But this is definitely a problem in the country in which you live, that we need a generation of people to get beyond all of this. We just have maturity. And we genuinely respect the various scholarly methodologies. And we avoid dichotomies at all costs. And we avoid the infighting at all costs. This is killing us. And it's totally senseless. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. People want to be a part of something. It's a deep, natural, biological reality of a human being. We want to be a part of something. And there's nothing greater to be a part of than the ummah of our Prophet ﷺ. And then there's degrees of affiliation that take place after that. But I think this is what's really important, is when we add these degrees of affiliation, we need to understand and have the wisdom and maturity not to have them negate the ones that come before them, that are more general. So meaning, let's just say simply that, okay, we're all Muslims. Okay, I'm Imriki, I'm an American, right? You all are a Britani. So that's a more specific affiliation, but me being Imriki doesn't negate me being Muslim. I'm just happen to be Imriki, you happen to be Britani. We can still very much, someone else is Hanafi, someone else is Shafi, someone else is Qadiri, or someone else is Shadili. All of these and nisbas that we have, they never negate the other more general affiliation. And so if I've always been if someone takes a spiritual path, for instance, and all of a sudden their relationship goes sour with their parents, or with their neighbors, or with their friends, or with some other group, I really question the intentions of that person, and if the message being delivered to them correctly. Is that the more specific the affiliation becomes, is that the stronger, the more general affiliation should actually be. So that if you truly are a person that has nisbah, an affiliation to a spiritual path, you should be a better neighbor, you should be a better son or daughter, you should be a better friend, you should have more respect for the other ways, you should hakada. And I think all of you know exactly what I'm talking about, how many problems that are so unnecessary are caused from this. But anyhow, back to this point, people of knowledge have an enormous responsibility upon their shoulders. And the only one that would seek that is a fool. The asal is, idfan nafsaka fi ard al-khumul. Bury yourself in the earth of obscurity, as Ibn al-Ta'ala says. Is that anything that is not buried, it will never fully give its fruit. You plant a seed on the concrete, nothing's going to happen. You plant it too deep in the soil, nothing's going to happen. Too close to the topsoil, that nothing's going to. You have to plant the seed at the right distance, depending upon what it is that you're trying to grow, and then go through the process of nurturing it. And then when it's weak, if it's trampled on, khalas, it takes time for roots to develop and so forth and so on. But the foundation is to bury yourself in the earth of obscurity and to not want to be known. And if someone seeks to be known, seeks leadership, then they'll be left to themselves and it will destroy them. And that the metaphor that our Prophet gave us is it will destroy you the way that a wolf would enter into a sheep's pen. So we had this is a graphic story, excuse me, especially sisters. But for the metaphor, we had chickens at Maqasid at one point. And unfortunately, that my own children were the culprits of what I'm going to tell you. They're supposed to feed these chickens. And if anyone's ever had chickens, you have foxes. You have foxes in London here. You have foxes all over the place. You know what I'm talking about. So foxes, they're the epitome of what it means to be cunning. This is what you're like cunning like a fox, sly as a fox. Like foxes are amazing what they will do to get the chickens. And they will build underground tunnels. They will do all different types of things to get to the chickens. So we had foxes on our property. And one day, my boys fed the chickens and left the door open. Ya Allah. So the fox gets in, and you have 20 or 30 of these chickens who can't defend themselves. And it was a bloodbath. And there was chicken parts all over the place, and blood all over the place, and feathers, and it was horrible. And the man who was taking care of them was devastated. And then it's like the main rooster was like the only survivor. He had half a leg and was all mauled and still trying to defend his female chickens, right? But the point is, imagine a wolf getting into a sheep's pen. What's going to transpire? Sheep, masakin, they can't defend themselves. That's what love of leadership does to your heart. So just take that metaphor of what happens, that you imagine that the chaos and the bloodbath, that's what happens in your heart. Your heart gets mutilated when you love leadership, and it's one of the very, very serious and diseases of the heart. So it's a responsibility that has to be recognized. And he says here, وَنَعْنِي بِعُلَمَاءِ الدُّنْيَا, we mean by the scholars of this world, يعني the evil scholars, الَّذِينَ قَصْدُهُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ التَّنَعُّمْ بِالدُّنْيَا, is that their intention by learning knowledge, and again you could extend this by using religion, is to seek pleasure, derive pleasure from the things of this world. What is the quintessential definition of an evil scholar? They're goal through their knowledge is to derive pleasure from the things of this world, وَالتَّوَصَّلْ إِلَى جَاء وَالْمَنْزِلَ عِنْدَ أَهْلِهَا, and to that attain status and reputation amongst its people. That's what it means. And again, it's very rare that you have someone that's just 100% of their intention is this. That's rare. But you'd be surprised how many people who start off okay, but we live in a celebrity culture. We live in a celebrity culture. People are taking pictures. People are doing this, people that. There's videos going out and clips and so forth and these types of things. Someone has to be really careful. And if you don't have the ability to do the same things that you're doing in front of people privately, it's better you just stop and just focus on yourself. Or at least pause. Meaning, one of the ways to really cultivate these meanings of sincerity in your heart is to learn to love to be alone. Learning to be alone, even though some people it's easier for than others, is one of the most important things of all. Everyone needs to have a time of khalwa, solitude. And preferably in a place in your home where no one else is, with bukhur, in some form of incense, without setting off the fire alarm, and that with head down, and that lights dimmed, and see how you feel. If you're just itching for your phone, and all you can think about is those experiences and the praises that people gave and so forth, then there's a serious issue. That's the foundation. Are the times where we're alone with Allah, where no one else is with us. And this is one of the most important things that we need to cultivate, the meanings of sincerity in our heart. But the vast majority of people have some degree of sincerity. But what happens is these other tendencies start to overtake the heart. And I was telling Shaykh Yasser yesterday, the day before, kind of some of the issues of the da'wah in America at least. And he was just like, it was incredulous. He could not believe it, what I was telling him. And, on one hand, not that we were speaking at one point, okay, the Imam doesn't have to be poor and drive a beat up used car that keeps breaking down. Okay, that's one extreme. There's nothing wrong with taking good care of your Imams. Right, and if the Imam all of a sudden drives a nice car, people start to there was like an Imam who just liked cars and drove a very nice car, and his whole community started to panic, because they thought that he was almost like a unbeliever because he drove a nice car. It's like, what's wrong with driving a nice car? The point is that balance is what we want. But on the other hand, there's this new tendency now to charge $1,000 a khutbah, $2,000 a khutbah, right? That extortionate honorariums that they're not going to go teach unless choosing the programs that honorarium is a little bit better. And some of these things come out and you only know it if you know people behind the scenes. Or people that when they're invited to conferences, no, I'm not going unless you give me the Saturday night slot. Right? Stipulating the slot that they want. Or I'll do fundraisers for you, but I get a percentage of the money that is raised. So if I raise $5 million, I get 5% of that or whatever. And then, there's Imams' salaries that could be in the hundreds of thousands. It's lucrative. Yallah, you all should go study. Why are you in IT and whatever else you're doing? Just go study. You can make a lot more money, right? Just keep getting YouTube videos out there. And then the advertisements go, you can make a lot of money off these things. But, it's just a disaster. And we need to revive. There's a whole book of the Ihya on kasb, on livelihood and ma'isha, and the various etiquettes that we need and so forth. It's an amazing book because it will open up the doors for us to turn our careers and our work into actually worship and a means to draw near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the first thing, is to not seek the dunya, that through the knowledge that it is that we have. What we want from that is only the hereafter. We only want the divine contentment of our Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we have to continue to place checks on ourselves when it comes to this. You have to regulate yourself in order to make sure that this is the case. And so he says here that the least of the degrees of the scholars to know the haqara of the dunya and the wretchedness, wa khissataha, yani its lowliness, wa kudurataha. He translated here as sordidness, yani this torpidity in this world, is that the world by its nature will make the heart unsettled, and wansiramaha, that it's going to pass, it's not permanent. And then by extension we also have to know the hereafter. And he says also we should know that this world is like kaffatay al-mizan, like two sides of the scale. The more the weight comes on one side, the more that the other side that goes up or down, depending where you place it. And he says that the world is like, compared to the hereafter, like the east to the west. The more you go in the direction of the east, by nature, your back is turned on the west, and the further you're getting away from the west. And that our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that he said, من طلب علما مما يبتغي به وجه الله تعالى ليصيب به عرضا من الدنيا لم يجد عرف الدنيا يوم القيامة. Narrated by Abu Dawood and Ibn Majah. Whoever seeks sacred knowledge with the intention of drawing near to, whoever seeks sacred knowledge, which should be sought only for the sake of Allah, but they seek it to attain something from this world, will not smell the scent of paradise on the Day of Judgment. Wow. Just as we quote the merit to encourage people to learn, we also have to balance that out with that this is not to deter people. Again, it's to create an awareness of the responsibility of being in a position where people look up to you and that follow you and listen to what it is that you're saying. You have to be careful with your words. And Imam al-Ghazali then goes on to say, وَمَنْ عَلِمَ هَذَا كُلُّهُ ثُمَّ لَمْ يُؤْثِرِ الْآخِرَ دِينًا فَهُوَ أَسِيرُ الشَّيْطَانِ قَدْ أَهْلَكَتُهُ شَهْوَتُهُ وَغَضَبَتْ عَلَيْهِ شَهْوَتُهُ. So whoever knows everything that we intuit about the nature of this world in relation to the hereafter, and then lets themselves prefer the world over the hereafter, he said this person is a prisoner of shaitan. Shaitan has imprisoned them. And even if they be free and they're not behind bars, shaitan has imprisoned them, and that his desires have destroyed him. And our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that he also told us that there's a number of different narrations that indicate this. But he says here, عقوبة العلماء موت القلب وموت القلب طلب الدنيا بعمل الآخرة. The punishment of the scholars, that neglect the hereafter, is that their heart dies. And the heart dies from seeking the world through an action that should only be, one should be seeking the hereafter through. So this is the first one. It's very clear, very straightforward. The more important part when it comes to this one, he actually mentions several pages of commentary, because this is the first one that he mentions. Several pages of commentary. He mentions another narration that says that don't sit with every scholar. Don't sit with every person of knowledge. He says, rather sit with the person of knowledge that calls you from 5 things to 5 things. So don't just sit with any person of learning. sit with someone who calls you from 5 things to 5 things. من الشك إلى اليقين. They're calling you from doubt to certitude. ومن الرياء إلى الإخلاص. And from showing off and doing things for people to doing things sincerely for Allah. ومن الرغبة إلى الزهد. They call you from just loving the things of this world and desiring whatever it is that you want from this world to detaching slowly. ومن الكبر إلى التواضع. And from arrogance to humility. ومن العداوة إلى النصيحة. And from having enmity towards people and everything else that includes, useless argumentation and so forth and so on, to nasiha. Someone that just wants to advise everyone well. So these are the type of people that we want to learn from. So all of that is just the first sign. The second one is أَلَّا يُخَالِفَ فِعْلُهُ قَوْلُهُ. His deeds do not belie his words. And he does not tell anyone to do something without himself first being the one to do it. And nasallahu salam al afiyah, may Allah have mercy upon us and forgive us all. And there's a difference here between someone who teaches people something and has no intention to do it, and between someone who is still struggling with themselves and calling themselves to it. And Imam Haddad's position is that even if someone is not fully practicing their knowledge, they should still teach their knowledge. Why? Because when someone has knowledge, there's 2 obligations upon them. 1, to act upon their knowledge, but 2, to teach it. So it's better just to do that 1 infraction and leave 1 as opposed to 2. So you still teach your knowledge even if you're not fully implementing it, while turning to Allah time and time again, asking Him to help you so that you're also someone who puts your knowledge into practice. But if we pause here, think about how much we know, everybody in this room. Even if some have converted fairly recently, think how much we know. And how much do we actually put into practice in relation to what we know? Yes, that we always want to keep learning. But how much do we actually put into practice in relation to what we know? It's a small fraction, Yani. And we're all in the same predicament. But this is why we read these books, to muster up the courage to be able to do what it is that we can. And Allah says in the Quran, أَتَأْمُرُونَ النَّاسَ بِالْبِرِّ وَتَنْسَوْنَ أَنفُسُكُمْ. Are you calling people to piety and forgetting your own selves? And whenever there's a khitab, an address in the book of Allah Ta'ala to another group, whether they be Jews or Christians or whoever, we shouldn't just say like, yeah, look at those people. No, this is for us so that we don't fall into those same negative religious tendencies. And then there's a hadith of our Prophet ﷺ, and again, that this chapter is kind of hard because it's intense and it's actually quite scary. Our Prophet said that I passed by on the night of the night journey by a people, تُقْرَدُ شِفَاهُمْ بِمَقَارِيدَ مِنْ نَارٍ. And there's people that scissors made out of fire and their lips were being cut. And the Prophet then asked, who are you? And they said that we used to call people to good, but not do it, and forbid people from evil, but do it. And they go on and on and on. And if we want to know why there are some people that just impact us so much, beyond the rhetoric, beyond their all of the things, the charisma and all of these types of things, is that it really relates to their state of heart. And that Malik ibn Dinar said, the scholar, if he doesn't act upon his knowledge, is his admonition, yani what he says, will slip off of people's hearts the way that rain slips off of a very smooth surface. And again, Imam al-Ghazali goes on for pages about this one. And then we'll move right on to the third. He is devoted to knowledge beneficial in the next world, that which increases desire for acts of worship, and he shuns branches of religious learning that are of little benefit or mainly debate and gossip. So, is that this scholar, this person of knowledge, this person who's living their religious life, a sign that they're sincere in this path is their number one concern is the knowledge that they know that they need. And it's a lot. So everything that's in the ʿUlum. So if you look at this volume that I have here, this is, of course, there's not a lot of words on each page. There's 8 volumes like this, or 9 actually. It's a large book. It's encyclopedic. It would take you a long time to just read through it, let alone to really take it little by little to understand it, let alone to actually put it into practice. But the whole point is, this should be our life. Every khutbah we hear should be rooted in this knowledge. The vast majority of classes that we take should be rooted in this knowledge. The vast majority of what we hear, of the books that we study, should be rooted in this knowledge, even if it's not the Ihya per se, but knowledge that is beneficial, knowledge that is considered to be from the knowledge that helps us draw near to Allah Ta'ala and prepare for the meeting with Him. And so he gives us a beautiful metaphor here. He says the likeness of the one who turns away what he calls from the ilm al-a'mal, from the knowledge that impacts our heart and then helps us to act, and preoccupies himself with debate or some other that useless knowledge or of knowledge of little benefit. He said is like a man who is sick and has a number of ailments, and he comes across an experienced doctor, and there's a small amount of time for him to actually get cured from his sickness. So instead of letting the doctor treat him and what he actually really needs, he starts asking the doctor about all the different medicines, that what are the ingredients, how do you understand that, how does this whole process work, and all of these intricacies from the science of medicine. The wiser thing would be is that you should probably let him treat you and get healed. And that's more important than understanding that the intricacies of the various types of medicine. So then moving along, number 4. He is disinclined to luxury in food and drink, enjoyment of clothes and embellishment of furnishings and housing, preferring less therein, emulating the early Muslims, Allah have mercy on them, and inclining towards the minimum in everything. And the only qualification that I will say here is that balance. This is different for different people in different times and in different geographical locations. That things that might be considered to be a luxury in one place is not necessarily considered to be luxury in another. And that balance is good. So if someone said that I'm not going to use hot water, even if I live in England, I'm going to make wudu with cold water, even if my arm feels like it's going to freeze. Yani, that could be a little bit extreme. So there's certain things, and we considered electricity to be a necessity. But electricity is actually not necessarily a necessity. People lived for long periods of time without electricity. Now, are you going to fault someone for living with electricity? No. That's obviously very different. The average meal that you and I tend to eat, it's good to keep things simple. It's actually better for your health to keep things simple. But in general, is that we don't want to go to extreme in these things. And things have their time and place. It is important from time to time especially if you have children, to take them out, take them for ice cream, make things fun for them, have times, but everything's in moderation. And that it might be that most of the meals that you eat are quite simple, and then once a week is that you have that something is that you really like and is not as healthy. And the Hakim that we studied with, Hakim Salim Khan, he was very much a proponent of the 80-20 rule. Balance is what we want. And you have to give your nafs a little bit of its portion at certain times, but not to where you go to extremes. And the same thing, same criterion applies to vacations and applies to that time off and things that we do and so forth and so on. And the same thing with one's clothing. And the most important thing is that we have an intention behind everything that it is that we do. And when we open up the doors for ourselves to have a little bit more and to move slightly away from this world, you want to make sure that you know what you're doing, but stay close to the foundation and make sure you have an intention in doing something else. And there definitely are awliya who have a lot of the things of this world. And there's the famous story that Habib Omar always mentions is this man who had an enormous gathering for one of his children who got married. And there was candles lit all around the edges. And someone came into the gathering and they were serving delicious food. And that there was a lot of people there. That this is excessive. And he was a person of Kashf. He realized that what was in his heart. And he said, I want you to try to blow out any candle that I lit for other than the sake of Allah. So this person goes over like, tries to blow out the candle, tries to blow out the khas. Yani, the people of Allah that even they have intention behind everything that it is that they do. And that's really the key here, is that we understand that particular subtlety. So then fifth, and we'll finish these up here, he keeps as far from rulers as possible, never going to visit them as long as there is any way to evade them. And keep in mind that Imam al-Ghazali was one of these people that was very close to the Sultan, to the Salatin, and to the people of political power. This is the general rule, is we don't want to be around people, and it's not just the rulers for the sake of rulers. We heard that nuance that Sidi Abbas mentioned yesterday. There might be times in our time, and I've even seen this from our teachers, where if you can advise a ruler, they do. If you can help them be more principled and you can make a change, you do so. But that's very different than wanting to be close to them. But you could also say, by extension, this doesn't just apply to rulers in our time. This could also apply to wealthy businessmen. This could also apply to that people of status. You know, people disproportionately just want to be closer to people that are very well known. Because if you're close to the one who's very well known, right, that person's renown benefits you in some ways. So these are things that we need to be very careful with and establish our relationships for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not for any false reason, because they have some type of political power, because they have some type of money, because they have some type of reputation. We have to build things on a real basis. Now, and then the sixth and final is, and the last thing that I'll say there, and I remember Habib Omar mentioning this when he was asked about this, taking it way back to the Arab Spring, which seems so long ago now. And he was saying how the scholar has to remain in a position where they give advice to the hakim and the mahkum. And it's important for people of knowledge to be independent, if possible, especially financially, if possible, so they can advise everyone. You want the person of knowledge to be in a position where they give everybody advice. They give advice to the mahkum, yani the constituents of a particular society, of a particular government, but then at the same time they can also advise governments. They can advise people who are in the position of power. And that might take a different form in the Muslim world than it takes here, but it's important to be in that space, and so that you can have different types of people that come, and the point is to teach everybody principles. And in whatever world they go back to, their job then is to put those principles into practice in their own particular context. And then he is reluctant to give formal legal opinion, refrains from verdicts about matters unclear, and avoids giving opinions whenever he can. Meaning, they're not flashy. These are people that have no problem saying, I don't know. And as it has been said, La adri nisf al-ilm, saying I don't know is half of knowledge. And there are so many different stories of the great people who came before us that would, if they're asked a question, they pass it on to someone else. Then they pass it on to someone else. Then they pass it on to someone else. And if someone is more qualified to answer that question, they have no problems whatsoever passing that on to the one who is more qualified. We're over time, so we'll suffice ourselves with that. And then come back to the final 6 bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Each one of these we could have gone, each one of these actually could have been a class. And what's important is that when we take this and these 12 points, we want to relate to it personally. So we should really think about in our own world and the lives that we live, how do each one of these signs pertain to us? Where are we with them? Even if we're not ulama, even if we're not scholars, even if we're not even serious students of knowledge. But everybody has some knowledge to a degree. So these apply to all of us, inshallah ta'ala. They apply to all of us, and inshallah that we are people who put them into practice in a way that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah ta'ala protect us, preserve us, and purify us, and make us sincere, and bless us in these gatherings. And may this knowledge penetrate our hearts, and may it not just pass in one ear and go out the other. May it be transformative, and may we absorb them, and may it forever change us. And may we continue to move up in the degrees of closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and put them into practice in a way that is most pleasing to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
وجد بالنوال منه إليّ